Hello and welcome. I have with me today members of our economics faculty at the National Law School of India University. We have with us today Sneha Thapliyal, Vijayamba R, and Anviksha Droll. I'm going to ask them a couple of questions and draw them out so that our viewers can get a sense of the diversity of our economics faculty and who they're also going to talk about the major minor track in economics that they have put together. So without further ado, let me start. My first question to the panelists is what got you into economics and what has kept you going? Most of you, I guess all of you have, your PhDs are done and dusted and you have come further along. So what is exciting for you in this discipline? Anyone wants to start?
Hi,
Vijayamba, do you want to
Atreyee.
start? Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Neha can start.
Yeah, thank you for the introductions. I think I'm going to start because my journey is very different from a traditional economist's journey. I had a master's degree in environment management, which is where I was exposed to the discipline of environmental economics, and that caught my attention. I subsequently did my master's dissertation in it, and that is when the ball sort of started rolling. And then when I enrolled for my PhD, I started from scratch to minor in economics, and that's how sort of. So for me, the biggest attraction for economics was the ability to have a set of tools to answer real world questions, and I think that's what got me into economics. Environmental economics in specific, but then subsequently generally the field of economics.
Oh, thanks. And I hope you'll speak a little bit about what environmental economics really means and how it is done further into our conversation. Vijayamba, do you want to go next?
So as a young student, when I started out, I was sure not to do science or commerce because clearly I was not interested in the realms of both the disciplines and domains. So I started my triple main BA course with psychology, economics, and sociology with mixed ideas of pursuing a journalism later on or doing anything else with these subjects. So as I moved on, I think I was equally interested in psychology and economics, but somehow a couple of aspects kept me in economics. So the first thing I could recollect is the ability to connect to whatever is happening in and around me. So I could see economics in day-to-day things like buying various things or household decision making, and it was discussed so much in day-to-day things such as news or any monetary policy change or anything that I read in newspapers had so much to do with economics. So the connectivity of the concepts that I study is something that interested me. And secondly, I would say a lot of faculty and people around me somehow they play a huge role. So the way the classes went, and I had also gotten into this program called Social Science Talent Search Scheme with ISEC Bangalore. So there I attended some guest lectures, met some excellent professors who tuned my interest in economics with the way that it has a lot of scope later on in terms of institutes, resource persons, and the possibility of having a successful career. So, yeah, I think these were some of the things which have sustained and kept me going in this field.
Anviksha? Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And so for me, I think it's a little bit similar to what Vijamba just mentioned. And I think it's more because I was always interested in mathematics and quants. So that was one of my favorite subjects. In fact, today I'm very fond of maths. So I was a science student, and when we used to study mathematics, and I used to think at that time that what is the use of this trigonometry, slopes, and everything. But then later on, when I was introduced to the economics branch, Then again, as Vijamba mentioned, similar to that, I used to be curious about understanding what is GDP and what is this numbers and what are all these stories, what are these trends that the newspapers and headlines mentioned about. So I think it was that interest that I had in knowing what all is happening. Plus, I got motivated with the tools. Like generally, it happens that whenever high school students study mathematics, they often think that will I use trigonometry or not, or will I use a plus b square or not. So when I found out that okay, these two things are connected, it fascinated me. And when I went for my graduation at that time, I also met some very good faculties at University of Delhi, and I met a couple of economists from Delhi School of Economics also. And at that time, interacting with them, it was a great experience, and I always wanted to learn more and more. I mean, initially, I was sure that I would be doing only masters in economics, but later on, during my internship, so I interned at Ministry of Finance during my masters. So after that, I became sure that okay, I need to delve deeper into it, and I'll do my PhD, and then I'm just keep going on and on.
So not all of you were bent on becoming academics right from the start, is what I understand. Vijamba said something about journalism and you wanted to do something else and start interned in the Ministry of Finance. Sneha, were you intent upon academics right from the start?
Right from the start, actually, I was very, very clear on the fact that I want to be in academics. And yeah, so even after my master's, I taught at a school for a while and then started my PhD.
You had some
Um,
clarity.
yeah, I think the only question was in the broad environmental domain, what specific subdomain do I want to work on? And that clarity came at the master's degree level. Yeah,
Right.
but this chartered course was something I was very sure of very early.
Uh-huh. So that brings me to my second question. I want each of you to speak a little bit about your current research, maybe frame it in the context of your larger intellectual journey, talk about questions you're asking in your research, methods you're using, and particular topics and themes that you're working on. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, so I have been working on labor market, and I have been using this data set, Village Dynamics of South Asia. This is by ICRISAT. So they give us a very large and micro level information. And why I use this data set? Because I wanted to know what exactly is happening in the Indian labor market, particularly for the villagers. So broadly, if I want to frame what I have been doing for the last 4 or 5 years, I'm trying to explore the aspects of multiple job holding. Are these farmers only working in agriculture, or are they engaging in other jobs which are not related to agriculture? And if they are doing, is it good or bad for the farming? And how does this impact the productivity of the farmers? And then recently, I have also picked up aspects of environmental efficiency, like if their income is growing, then at that point, because we have a discussion about the natural farming and zero budget farming and organic farming. So in that case, we are exploring that how the additional income, and if they are getting any additional income, do they actually invest it in other resources or not? Or at the end of the day, is it beneficial to invest in other environmental friendly inputs? And in the long term, I'm trying to explore other behavioral aspects also. So I'm just trying to jot it down and the way forward. I'm just working on that.
Right. Do you see the village economy also kind of divided according to sort of categories like caste, gender, etc.? Like, do these behavioral patterns differ in your research according to whether a person is a man or a woman, whether a person is a upper caste or lower caste or whatever?
Yeah, I think one of my studies has a very interesting result. So even though I did not account for caste in my studies, but I was analyzing the impact of gender on diversification. So
Hmm.
generally, the results show that it is the male-headed households because of the patriarchy and the financial independence, they are more likely to go into multiple job hunting. But for this set of states, we found that it was the female-headed households who were more likely to participate in the multiple job holding. So it might depend on the geography, or we have to see what were the other financial resources and infrastructure availability. So this was one very interesting result that we found. And again, because the data was a bit limited, so I've not been able to get to know what were the behavioral factors. But yeah, this was the one of the main findings.
So would you say you work in the broader domain of behavioral economics?
Not exactly, because behavioral economics in itself is a different branch, but when we are doing the research, we are relying that our research is based on a certain set of assumptions, or if we are not having a particular data that is available related to, say, averseness, whether the person is willing to take up a risk, whether the person is able to willing to adopt the organic inputs, even though they are given to him for free or at a subsidized price. So in that case, how much is the impact of behavioral factors in these cases, that I want to look into in the long term, and probably I would
Sure,
be visiting a field or.
sure. Thanks. Vijamba, do you want to go next?
Yeah. So from the time I started my PhD, my broad areas of interest have been in the fields of gender and labor economics. So I have worked in areas of women's work, time use, ownership of assets, decision making, and issues of measurement. So for my PhD, I have looked at the role of women in livestock economy, particularly addressing the question of estimation of women workers, and then if they own livestock assets, and how do they decide on various aspects of livestock raising. So I have used both the sources of data, have gone to specific villages in Karnataka and have collected primary data from the women who do raise animals, and have also used secondary data sets such as periodic labor force surveys and time use survey. Uh, and then later for my postdoc at Azim Premji University, I have worked on questions of social norms. So if social norms matter, when we talk about women's employment, and further some questions on understanding the trade-off between women's paid employment and unpaid work. So if they say get into paid employment, is it accompanied by an offsetting reduction in unpaid work, given the say greater amount of time that women spend? So these are my say broad areas of work over the past few years. And I would say that the insights that I have gained in addressing these questions have come from the usage of both primary and secondary data sets. So that is somewhat that captivates my interest, because secondary data sets are very useful to give an overall and aggregate picture of what is happening with specific to any question, whereas primary data sets are extremely useful to get detailed insights that is not often got from secondary data. So at the household and individual level, I have again done time use survey. So I've been part of a project where we went to individual women and asked them what are the activities that they have done, say from the time they got up to whichever reference period that we want to cover. And then I've asked specific questions on decision making, and then I've conducted focus group discussion with groups of women from different social groups, etc. So I think the combination of such methods has again given me a lot of insights and learning in the questions that I have pursued. So right now also I'm interested in working with Time Use Survey 24, which will be released in the coming months. So I want to again see how has women's participation changed in activities of employment, unpaid work, the debates that have surrounded this question over the past few years in the context of India.
Right. Thanks so much. Sneha?
So again, because my journey was a little different from a traditional economist, you'll see that my research also progresses in a similar fashion. So I started off when I was interested in economics, thinking about questions of conservation. So essentially, the several decades old debate between fortress conservation versus the rights of traditional forest dwellers. So that's the starting point for it. And as I moved from there, and I started doing my PhD, I was exposed to very similar to Anviksha and Vijayamba, large-scale data sets which are nationally representative. So basically a treasure trove of information which you can use to answer broader questions. So the thinking for research also evolved, and I looked at inclusive growth. So what happens to environment as well as economic welfare as countries expand their economy. So it moved away from a very specific concentrated zone of conservation focused onto the larger welfare goals. Eventually my research, but through all of this, there's been one thread that's been common in my research is that I'm interested in questions of inequality, social and economic inequalities, and how they impact outcomes as well as are affected by existing outcomes. So that bidirectional relationship is something that's been a constant in my research thread. Subsequently, my research expanded to asking questions about other environmental regulations and policies. While I started off my master's with primary data collection, I think I moved on to secondary data collection and using causal econometrics tools to answer, methods to answer these questions. And I think once I was comfortable enough to be able to demonstrate these causal relationships, I sort of took a step back, and currently my work is a lot to do with jurisprudence as well. So I'm interested in how different higher courts take judgments and what is their focus and how do they assess environmental domains, different problems. So I'm now going back and exploring a lot of qualitative methods as well, not just quantitative methods. So I think as I've grown as an academic, my research interests have been broadening both in domains and in methods. But I would say fundamentally, the question that drives me still is the question of inequality, the question of disparity and differences. So yeah, that's an overview of
You
my
mean
research.
inequality in access to resources, primarily, no?
No, not always.
No,
But
not
yes,
always.
in my
Okay.
PhD, that's the question I was answering, inequality in access to common pool resources. But I'm interested generally in inequality. So the second part of my dissertation was looking at really what would be a vision of inclusive growth, which is more equal than what it currently is, right? So, and then you move on to thinking about what is inequality in exposure to heat. How does inequality play out there? So yeah, not just access to resources, access to public utilities, access to environmental bads. Yeah, across, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question before I get to my last question, which I wanted to ask economists my whole life. Not my whole life, but a lot of my life, which is that we find in anthropology, and that is the discipline that I come from, at least the older school, I'm thinking of the British anthropologist Malinowski, who went to study rituals in Melanesian islands in the Australasian zone of in the Melanesian islands, and found that people had economic systems that they did not articulate as economic systems. They had ways of exchanging, bartering, regulating economic relations about who gets how much for who gets how many blankets for this many lamps or whatever, something like that. There was a complex account that he gives of the Kula ring, which is a exchange system that they have, but they articulate it in ritual language. So my question to you is, what happens if the data that you all are gathering um, is there are economic decisions which don't reveal themselves in economic language? The simpler part of my question is, do people necessarily always render themselves transparent in the language of economics? So when you go and ask someone, like why do you work in this sector and not the other sector? Why don't you have multiple jobs, or why do you have multiple jobs? Are they likely to express those responses necessarily in the terms that economics offers? I'll stop there. I'll wait for your response.
Yeah, I think from the limited experience on field that I have, it's about how do you connect with the people in the world that they live in. So it's the job of different people as researchers or academicians as to how they will interpret um, the responses that they get from people. So just to give an example, if I go out to field and ask a woman, directly, do you decide or do you have any bargaining power within the household in terms of, say, the receipts that you receive from milking animals? I don't think I would get straightforward answers. So,
Right.
yeah, so I think I would have to spend some time building rapport and connect with the world that they live in terms of how their routine is and how many hours it takes to milk the animals or do the specific chores. And then when does the fortnightly milk payments get done in the village, and how is the procedure, who goes from the household, and then how much do they really get based on different seasons, and then what do they get to do, who gets to decide. So for me, I think the rapport building and then living in the world that your respondent lives has a lot to do in getting accurate responses. And later, it is the job of the economist to interpret it in different economic terms, connecting it to the question that you really want to look into. Yeah.
So, anyone else?
So I completely agree with Vijayamba, but I just sort of add on a couple of things as well that I think might work. So it really depends on the question that you're answering. There are certain decisions that are driven by economic values, and I'm using this term very broadly, so we don't need to think of it as an actual existence of fiat, but just the fact that you're driven by constraints, right? There are some resource constraints, and that's the question that you're interested in. So in that sense, I think economics gives you that ability to understand how people optimize their choices. Right. So, so even if it is not purely in a transactional budget sense, so this is you have 100 rupees and you sort of decide where you want to spend that 100 rupees, but it also tells you that people will figure out the best use of whatever resources they have. Then it gives you the ability to ask the second order question: are they solving this problem for short term or for long term? And this you can think about it in terms of community conservation, which is a more longer term approach, which is as opposed to the Hardin's argument of tragedy of commons, which is a shorter term approach. But the essence of it remains the same, that they're optimizing step one, and step two, that they're optimizing for a different different time period.
Order,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I think that's also a nuance that's interesting in research. And the second point that I want to make is I think economics is acknowledging that not all of us are homo economicus, rational beings, and so on and so forth. So you see a burgeoning literature on behavioral economics, which is essentially using things that we know from social psychology and seeing how they fit into the broader economist hardcore sort of, here are the assumptions and this is how we expect you to behave. What if you don't behave like assumption 2 and 3? What does social psychology tell us? And then sort of building on psychology's rich body of work. So I think those are the two additions I'd like to make from what Vijayamba said.
And Viksha, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think what Sneha mentioned. So in this case, if we want to put it in simpler terms, we can just take the simple example of environmental conservation. So the models that we study, we just normally discuss about the willingness to pay, how much people are willing to pay in order to conserve the
Dutra Pay's
environment.
principle.
Yeah, to decrease the level of pollution and so on. But when we exactly go to them, then first thing is that you need to develop the connect, as Vijamba mentioned. But second is also that we don't know how much is their actual willingness to pay, and whatever answer they are giving, that depends on so multitude of factors which we might not have taken into account. So, and most popular one in this case is for the public goods. Like they know that, okay, for pollution conservation or for planting a sewage treatment materials and some similar things, eventually the society will come up with that. So even if they give a larger value of willingness to pay, it might help, or even if they give a lower value, it might happen that other people are willing to pay, and the ultimate goal is that that system is in place. So I think it
Mm.
depends on the context as well, and the type of setting that we are investigating.
Sure, sure, of course. So my last question is, you are part of the team that has designed the economics major minor track in the NLS BA honors program. What is the most unique, exciting, freakishly new, everything thing about it?
The entire system is flexible yet rigorous. For example, if any student chooses an economics major and minor in a different discipline, the whole aspect of interdisciplinary thinking is rooted very early and starts at the undergraduate level, unlike many other programs where it is very, say, one discipline specific, because these days the workforce and the world that we live around is changing so rapidly, and the whole interdisciplinary thinking is so much needed, and it is in focus. So I think the way the BA program is structured very much facilitates this interdisciplinary thinking. Now, coming to the economics program, for me, I think the pedagogy is extremely interesting. So for the economics majors, as outlined, we have, say papers like quantitative tools for economics, macroeconomics, public economics, development economics, which are very rigorous in, structure. So any student who chooses an economics major can pursue different careers, which give a very strong foundation in economics. But the way it is going to be taught, coming to the pedagogy, facilitates this application and connection to the real world. So if I have to give a couple of examples, say in development economics, we have discussed on bringing the models that we regularly discuss from the Western world's point of view to developing economies and India's structural transformation particularly. So students get to do this anchoring of imagination as to how we can connect these different models into the specific context that we are living in. Or say in the case of macroeconomics, we would want to have more discussion hours where different policy changes would be discussed and how it affects different people, say a worker in gig economy, or somebody else doing any other aspect is affected from a change in any repo rate, reverse repo, etc. So such things interest me. Similarly, for public economics, we have mentioned that we want to introduce budget documents as relevant course materials. So anytime a student watches budget speeches or reads the entire discussion on annual budget, it would be very interesting as to how we can connect the tools that we discuss in class to what is happening around us. So I think the pedagogy for me is extremely interesting, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Nice, thank you. Sneha?
So for me, I think one of the most exciting things is the way economics is the way we plan to introduce economics to our students, right? So we start off by making them comfortable with mathematics. I know many students are apprehensive of the subject without using an extreme. So we introduce them to mathematics and statistics, get them comfortable with numbers, but we also show them how numbers are fun. But we also show them what numbers can do, even if you don't want to build a mathematical model to explain a particular economic system. in parallel, we introduce them first to the core theory of economics. I mean, economics is now mathematical, but it originated in philosophy. Its root is firmly in philosophy. So just to introduce them to how, what are the fundamental thought systems that led to the evolution of this discipline. So think of this as an 101 sort of introduction to economics. And once you have this foundation, then should you be interested, you can build on this with varying degrees of mathematical intensity, as well as the domain of your choice. So the idea is that we give you the option of choosing what kind of sub-disciplines within economics would you want to do. So are you interested in environmental economics, development economics, history of economic thought? You're interested in understanding, perhaps you're not even in fact, and this brings me to my second point, the way we're thinking about the curriculum structure as well as the pedagogy is most, I'm not going to say all, because some of them will be intense in their use of math and stat, but many of the courses you can take simply because you're interested in that domain. So for example, and I'll speak for my domain, someone's interested in journalism, but is also interested in the question of climate change or resource management. So they can come and sit in an environmental economics course and get another perspective on how you can assess these questions, like if nothing else, another lens to understand these complicated, wicked problems, as policy analysts would say, grand challenges and wicked problems. So to me, these two things are really exciting. Beginner steps that everybody can be exposed to, making them feel comfortable with the subject, and then giving the advanced options to those who are interested, as well as all the other majors can also gain from these specialized subdomains that we're talking about. So yeah, I think
Wow.
those two things.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure prospective students can't wait to get inside your classrooms and learn all of these exciting things that you just talked about. So I'll end this call here. Thank you ever so much.